Fat and flat. Those were the two words Sarah thought of when she looked into her arch nemesis, the mirror. Sarah didn't very much like her own body. Unlike the other girls at school, the beautifuls as she liked to call them, Sarah didn't have a very alluring appearance, at least in her opinion. While other girls could describe their shapes as being like an hourglass or a pear, Sarah would say she was shaped like a potato. Sarah looked at her own bulbous nose and prominent ears. The rest of her wasn't any better either. Her body parts seemed to have been stuck under her body at random. It reminded her of the Mrs. Mix and Match doll she used to have as a kid. But at least Mrs. Mix and Match had Mr. Mix and Match. Sarah didn't have a boyfriend. Although there was one boy she admired and dreamed of, she knew he wasn't dreaming of her. But in any case, it was time to get ready for school. For her birthday, Sarah's mother had given her permission to wear a little light makeup. Sarah applied some mascara and pink-tinted lip balm to her face. It was as good as it was going to get, but even then, it wasn't good. Sarah's mother was already dressed for work when Sarah came downstairs for breakfast. Her mom had a natural prettiness that Sarah herself lacked. Perhaps it skips a generation, Sarah thought. Sarah opted to have a simple yogurt for breakfast instead of a toasty bagel. She didn't need all those carbs, she told herself. At school, before first period, as Sarah was getting her science book out of her locker, she saw them. The beautifuls. Lydia, Jillian, Tabitha, and Emma. The popular cheerleaders of Sarah's school. They were royalty. They were stars. They were who every girl in school wanted to be, and who every boy in school wanted to be with. Sarah envied them wholeheartedly. Each of those girls had a different brand of beauty, different complexions of allure, and clothes from high-end stores that must have cost a fortune. Today, each of those girls were themed in black and white attire, dresses and shirts with stripes and dots that all matched. Sarah thought they were the pinnacle of what it meant to be beautiful. Abby, on the other hand, thought they looked like penguins. Abby was Sarah's childhood best friend. They'd known each other for years, and, much like Sarah, Abby wasn't exactly one of the popular kids in school. Abby wore her hair in the same braids she'd been wearing them in since her and Sarah were kids. She still wore the same gold wire-framed glasses, too. The only difference was that Abby now had braces and was a few inches taller. Still, Sarah could see the potential for beauty that Abby had. Abby had a flawless coffee with cream complexion and wonderful hazel eyes behind those glasses. Abby took dance classes after school and had a graceful, slender body, even if she hid it under the hideous poncho she liked to wear. Meanwhile, Sarah had no beauty. Abby had beauty, but didn't care about it enough to notice. It was clear that Sarah cared more about looks than Abby did. Today was Friday, and so that meant pizza was being served for lunch, but Sarah had opted to get a salad instead of the mediocre school pizza. The fact the pizza was middling wasn't what deterred Sarah, however. It was that the pizza had too many carbs. Sarah decided to ask Abby a question. What would you do with $1 million? The catch being that she wasn't allowed to donate it. It was money you had to spend on yourself. With that in mind, Abby answered by saying that she'd use the money to travel. She, along with her mom, dad, and brother, would go to Paris. They'd stay in a nice hotel and visit the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre. But of course, Sarah had different dreams. With $1 million, she'd get her teeth professionally whitened. She'd go to a high-end salon and get her hair done. She'd get skin treatments, a total makeup makeover, a nose job to finally get rid of that potato nose. Abby didn't agree unhappy with Sarah's obsession, of course. She thought Sarah cared too much about looking as beautiful as the popular girls. When they were kids, Sarah and Abby would talk about books and movies, but now Sarah's changed, and the only thing she cares about is how she looks. Abby brought this up to Sarah, but Sarah didn't appreciate the judgment. It sparked an outburst in Sarah. She stood and yelled loud enough that the entire cafeteria could hear. After that, Sarah marched off, and by the time school was finally over, she concocted a plan that she was ready to set in motion as soon as she was home. She gathered all the money she had through allowance and birthday cash, then made her way to the beauty supply store just a short walk away from her house. She bought hair dye that would make her look blonde, and bleach so that her hair would actually look like the box's pure platinum. But it didn't turn out how Sarah had hoped. She had accidentally left the peroxide in her hair for too long, and so when she actually dyed it, her hair became an ugly bright green. Thankfully, the mall's hair salon was still open, and so when Sarah's mother came home, she took Sarah there to fix her bad hair day. The next day, when Sarah returned to school, she was adamant on not sitting at the loser's table anymore. She instead sat herself down at the same table that the beautifuls sat at, albeit at the very opposite end. She expected one of them to tell her to go away, but they never did. As a matter of fact, they didn't even notice her. She was invisible to them. Sarah picked up her food tray and headed toward the trash can, but on her way, she accidentally bumped into a tall boy, causing her to dump the remains of her salad all over his white shirt. This boy, unfortunately, was Mason Blair, Sarah's school crush, and, in her opinion, the most perfect guy in school. Sarah always wanted Mason to notice her, though certainly not like this. On her way home from school, Sarah opted out of taking the bus and instead decided to walk her way home. On her way, she passed by a wrecking yard filled with the obliterated corpses of old cars, a graveyard of trucks, SUVs, and other vehicles that had all been left to rust and rot. Yet, as Sarah passed by, she noticed something in the car nearest to the scrap heap's fence. Sticking out of the trunk of a big old sedan was a thin arm attached to a white little hand. Burning with curiosity, Sarah entered the junkyard and approached the wrecked sedan. After some moderate struggle getting the trunk open, she was able to pry it up to reveal the owner of the hand sticking out of the trunk. A doll. Or, at least, that's what came to Sarah's mind at first. Though she wasn't confident in doll being an accurate word, it was at least a few inches taller than Sarah herself, and it was jointed together like an action figure so that the limbs and waist were movable. If anything, it was more like a puppet or a robot of some kind. Sarah might not know what this thing is, but she was certain about one thing. It was beautiful. The thing had big, green, glossy eyes. It had pink bow lips and pink circles on its smooth, silver face. It had red hair and twin pigtails and a sleek, skinny body with a long neck, a tiny waist, and a rounded bust and hips. Its arms and legs were long, slender, and elegant. Suffice to say, it was only natural that Sarah wondered where such a beautiful and perfect object might have come from. Sarah decided to take the thing home with her. When she got home, she set the girl robot down on the floor of her bedroom, then cleaned it of the tarnish and dust that plagued the thing after sitting in the trash heap for so long. After cleaning the robot from head to toe, Sarah noticed that the shininess made it even more beautiful. Upon getting behind the robot to clean the other side, she also noticed an on-off switch at the small of the machine's back. She flicked it and at first nothing happened, but then the robot made a rattling sound. The machine shook all over, as if it was about to lift off or fall apart. Then it went still again. Sarah really didn't think the robot was going to do much else, until it did. The robot pivoted, its upper body suddenly shifting as its head turned to face Sarah. When it spoke, it had the voice of a young girl, a girl that introduced herself as Eleanor. When Sarah greeted Eleanor back, she was surprised to hear the robot say her name back to her. Perhaps this thing was more sophisticated than Sarah originally thought. Eleanor thanked Sarah for rescuing and cleaning her, and to pay Sarah back, she offered to do something for Sarah. After all, everybody wants something, and Eleanor was adamant on making Sarah's wishes come true. There was something that came to Sarah's mind, of course, and that was the wish to become beautiful. But to be beautiful is quite a large wish. But Eleanor tells Sarah that within 24 hours, she'll have a plan to start making this big wish come true. Sarah still couldn't quite believe that she was even talking to Eleanor. Part of her even thought that this was a dream, especially when, come the next morning, Eleanor was standing as lifeless as ever in the corner of the room. But when Sarah returned home from school that afternoon, Eleanor awoke with a gift for Sarah, a necklace with a chunky silver chain with a large silver heart pendant dangling from it. Eleanor asked Sarah to make her a promise to never ever take off that necklace. Apparently, somehow, the necklace had something to do with the wish Eleanor would soon grant Sarah. Little by little, every morning that Sarah woke, she would wake just a little bit more beautiful than the day before. At least, that's what Eleanor told her. Sarah didn't believe her, but she put the necklace on anyway. Now it was time for Eleanor to sing Sarah to sleep. Even though it was still early, the necklace would only work if Sarah let Eleanor sing her to sleep. Sarah climbed into bed and under her covers, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, gently stroking Sarah's hair with her cold little hand as she sang a soft tune.
Go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep, my sweet Sarah. When you wake, all your dreams will come true.
When Sarah awoke the next morning, she woke feeling oddly great compared to how she usually felt. The first thing she noticed was Eleanor standing still in the corner of her bedroom. The other thing she noticed was the heart pendant still around her neck, meaning that the conversation she had with Eleanor yesterday did in fact happen, and therefore Eleanor must have been real. Sarah would also notice that her arms were slimmer and more toned now. The dry patches of skin she often had were gone, and both arms were soft and smooth to the touch. Her fingers were no longer stubby, they were long and elegant. Her fingernails were even painted a rose petals pink. Later that day, when Sarah returned home from school, Eleanor awoke once more as the daylight outside began to fade. She asked if Sarah was a little happier today than she was yesterday. Sarah's answer was yes, of course. Eleanor reiterated that all she wanted was to grant Sarah her wishes and make her happy. Certainly a nice thought, but Sarah felt inclined to ask why. Eleanor told Sarah it was because Sarah saved her. Sarah pulled her from the wreckage and brought her back to life. Now, like a fairy godmother, Eleanor would grant Sarah her wishes. But Sarah must never take off that necklace, and she must let Eleanor sing her to sleep. That way, when Sarah wakes up, she'll be a little bit more beautiful than she is today. When Sarah woke up the next day, she was a little taller. Not only that, but her legs were much more magnificent. No longer were her legs stubby and stuck onto her round body, but they were long and toned and dainty. At school, Sarah saw Abby in the hall as the other girl was digging through her locker. Sarah approached her and apologized for all the mean things she said the other day. They made up quickly, but Abby did notice that Sarah seemed taller. Sarah was able to cover it up, saying that she'd simply been working on having better posture. The next day when Sarah woke up, Sarah was surprised to see that the parts of her that had been soft and flabby were now tight and toned. The parts of her that had been flat and childish were now rounded and feminine. At this rate, Sarah was going to need new clothes because of all the drastic changes she was undergoing. That day at school, there were a lot more eyes on Sarah than usual. People were finally beginning to notice her. Even Mason Blair, the boy who Sarah had accidentally dumped her salad on a few days ago, had smiled at her. That was after she bumped into him a second time, of course, but this time he gave her a dazzling, perfect smile. When Sarah came home, she was quick to thank Eleanor for the new, perfect body the robot girl had granted her. But there was still something missing. As Sarah put it, guys would say she's pretty from afar, but far from pretty. Eleanor could grant Sarah this wish, but this would be different compared to the other changes Eleanor had helped Sarah with. You see, growth is normal for a child, but someone's face is what is most recognizable to them. All through your life you've woken up, looked in the mirror, and seen your face. To see a totally different face as your reflection would be quite the shock, but it's a shock that Sarah wants. Just like before, when Sarah woke in the morning, she felt the changes before she actually saw them. When she looked in the mirror and saw her new face, it was amazing. It was beautiful. Everything she once hated about her appearance was entirely gone. That potato nose she hated so much was now tiny and perfectly straight. No longer was she fighting a unibrow. She now had delicate thin arches for eyebrows. Her hair was much fuller and shinier. Even her teeth were perfectly straight and white. Sarah was now the total package, just as she always wished to be. Even the beautifuls that Sarah always envied took interest in her. They thought she was an actual entire new girl attending the school, a testament to how much Sarah had really changed. They even invited her to their Sunday afternoon visits to the mall where they try on clothes and makeup. Abby isn't too thrilled about Sarah's new friends, of course. Abby sees those girls for who they really are. That being shallower than rain puddles. But it's the beautiful people who get what they want. And if Abby just worked a little bit on her appearance, then she'd probably be the prettiest girl in school. At least, that's what Sarah told her. But Abby was far less interested in how others saw her, and she was quite content with who she was. Later that day, while Sarah was walking toward the school bus, she once again came in contact with the one and only Mason Blair. He asked if she would like to go to the Brown Cow with him. The Brown Cow was a little ice cream stand right across the street from the school. Before now, Sarah always resisted going because she was conscious about her weight, but now she didn't mind so much. After they were done with their ice cream, Mason asked Sarah out on an official date. Saturday would be the night that Mason and Sarah go out for pizza and a movie. When Saturday eventually came around, the date went perfectly, and he even asked if she'd like to go to the basketball game with him next week. Sarah might have not really been interested in basketball, but she was certainly interested in Mason Blair. In any case, it was everything Sarah had ever hoped for, and it was all thanks to Eleanor. Sunday came around and Sarah went out to the mall with Lydia and the other beautifuls. She didn't buy anything because it was all way too expensive, but all in all the day was fun and she regarded it as another success in her book. During that night, however, when she slept, she had a dream about Mason. They were sitting in the movie theater, but when he reached to hold her hand, it wasn't his hand that gripped Sarah's, it was Eleanor's. When Sarah looked at Mason, she saw that it was now Eleanor in his place. Eleanor smiled. a grin full of deathly sharp teeth. Sarah screamed in the dream, waking in the real world to find Eleanor looming over her bed as she stared at Sarah with those dull green eyes. Apparently, this was something Eleanor did every night as Sarah slept. She stated that she did this in order to protect Sarah, to keep Sarah safe from any and all danger that might lurk. Sarah was reasonably creeped out, of course, and even as she tried to drift back to sleep, she couldn't help but feel as if something was wrong. The next day, when Sarah was hanging out with the Beautifuls at school during lunch, the Beautifuls were all making fun of Abby, which Sarah found herself not really enjoying. Abby was still her friend after all, and although she might dress like she was still in preschool, Sarah knew that Abby was a nice person. Not that Lydia or the other Beautifuls cared. When it was Sarah's turn to dump her tray into the trash, she stepped on something slippery which caused her to fall. Flat on her back, she heard all the other Beautifuls laughing at her, but then she heard something else. Something from inside her. Something metallic and mechanical. The laughter she heard previously was replaced with screams as she felt her body jolt and shake and jerk. That's when she realized it. The necklace that Eleanor had told her to never take off was no longer around her neck. It had come off during Sarah's fall. Abby came to Sarah's aid, helping her back to her feet. But when Sarah looked down at herself, she realized why everybody was screaming. Sarah's once perfect body was changing. The skin and flesh and blood had disappeared, replaced by gears, wires, cables, and other mechanical bits that were rusted. She had to get out of here. She had to get to Eleanor. Eleanor would know what to do. But before she left, Abby gave Sarah the pendant that she'd dropped. Sarah took the pendant, thanked Abby for being a good friend, then ran as fast as her makeshift metal legs could carry her. Even now, she was still changing. Her joints were squeaking with every step, while the rest of her body continued to harden. As she ran home, there were people that stopped and stared at poor Sarah. People that were confused, scared, or even sympathetic. They looked at her as if she was some sort of mad scientist experiment created in a lab. Whatever she was becoming, it was something incapable of producing tears. Although her joints were getting stiffer and stiffer every second, she did eventually make it home. But Sarah didn't find Eleanor in her usual place in her bedroom. Sarah checked everywhere in the house, calling out Eleanor's name with a newly metallic and harsh tone, fitting of her broken down body. The only place Sarah hadn't checked yet was the garage. She assumed that Eleanor was perhaps hiding from her on purpose. There was a cabinet in the garage that Sarah supposed would be a good hiding place, and so with moderate difficulty, Sarah proceeded to pull open the cabinet's door. An avalanche of clear plastic bags poured out. Plastic bags that contained human limbs inside of them, with pools of blood at the bottom of the bags. Arms, legs, and even human organs and entrails. The limbs had all been neatly and surgically severed. But why were they here at all? Whose body was this? And then she saw it. A familiar nose. A potato-shaped nose in a small bag. Sarah screamed, and a sound akin to that of a car's brakes screeching echoed from her. That's when she heard Eleanor giggling behind her. At this point, Sarah could barely move at all. She had to drag her rusted body around to face Eleanor. Sarah noticed something she'd never seen on Eleanor before. A heart-shaped button just below Eleanor's throat that was mighty similar to the very same heart-shaped pendant that Eleanor gave Sarah. When Eleanor pressed that button, her entire body began to change. Her silver finish became a pinkish shade of Caucasian skin, and soon enough, she looked exactly like Sarah, the old Sarah, the real Sarah, the Sarah that had once been much too obsessed with her own appearance. This Sarah, looking back on it, hadn't been so bad looking after all. Eleanor smiled with Sarah's old smile as she put on some of Sarah's old clothes. If anything, Sarah certainly made Eleanor's wish come true. She pushed the button that opened the garage door, gave the actual Sarah a little wave, then skipped out into the sunshine and down the sidewalk. Sarah couldn't control her own movements now. She was falling apart piece by piece. Soon enough, Sarah was no longer a pretty girl, but a heap of useless junk to be thrown away and forgotten. She was able to see herself in a nearby mirror that was propped up against the wall. She didn't resemble herself at all anymore. She really was just a pile of scrap. She felt sad, then she felt scared, and then she felt nothing at all. That, my friends, was Fazbear Frights not Into the Pit, To Be Beautiful. This one marks the beginning of characters in these stories meeting utterly horrible and often gruesome ends. A lot of people talk about how modern FNaF isn't very scary, or that the games have always kind of been kiddie horror. Whatever you'd like to believe, of course, but I will say, these books tend to be, at the very least, the most screwed up stuff in FNaF that you can find. Sarah getting her body slowly but surely replaced by robotic parts as she sleeps is definitely pretty rough, but it's not even the tip of the iceberg. Of course, the message of this story is about body positivity, more or less. Be happy with who you are and what you look like, and be careful what you wish for, because a weird clown robot thing might steal your body if you ask it to make you look pretty. Now, as for what Eleanor actually is, this story is actually part of the wider narrative told across Fazbear Frights, often referred to as Stitchline. Eleanor is not only the antagonist of To Be Beautiful, but of Stitchline as well. It's never actually explained exactly where Eleanor comes from or how she came to be, but we know that she has a hankering for human suffering, much like the FNaF community as a whole. As these stories go on, especially Stitchline itself, you'll kind of realize that these stories have a lot to do with stuff like Remnant and Agony, especially the latter. Whatever exactly Eleanor is, she is some sort of evil entity that feeds off negative emotion and, again, suffering in general. I won't spoil too much, but I will say that going forward, Eleanor is the mastermind behind multiple other Fazbear Fright stories, and what happens in them. To that end, I think the simplest answer as to what Eleanor is would be that she's some sort of agony manifestation in the same vein as Shadow Freddy or RXQ. Beyond that though, there isn't really much to speculate about this story. Suffice to say, it doesn't suffer the same problem that Into the Pit does. There's only one version of To Be Beautiful. There is, of course, the question of how the heart pendant was able to disguise Sarah. Well, for starters, it's something to do with Remnant. The pendant was created by a guy named Dr. Talbot, and Eleanor obtained it after the fact. We see in To Be Beautiful that the pendant is not only holding Sarah together, but it's also making her appear human still. I'll be honest, I really wasn't sure how to explain this, so I did what any confused FNaF fan might do, and I looked on Reddit. Luckily, I did actually find a thorough breakdown of the heart pendant via a post made by Double T Squid. T-Quid? Something like that. Anyway, they did a very awesome and great breakdown of the pendant, and I think it absolutely makes sense. Basically, what it boils down to is the pendant's remnant making Sarah's body believe it is still alive. Sounds odd, I know, but there is actually precedent for this in another Fazbear Fright story featuring the infamous Fazgoo. Sarah's body is, for all intents and purposes, an illusion created by the remnant. The reason why Sarah still eats, talks, and can move at all is because that remnant is basically gaslighting her body into thinking it's still alive and complete even after she's been entirely replaced by metal parts. Now, as for my official rating of this story, I give To Be Beautiful 2 out of 5 Faz stars. Unfortunately, this story just isn't for me. I do find Eleanor to be interesting, but Sarah isn't a very likable character in my opinion, and I just don't find the plot all that intriguing. Now with that all out of the way, I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of Fazbear Frights To Be Beautiful. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to like and subscribe. If you have any thoughts or opinions of your own regarding this story or FNaF in general, then don't forget to drop a comment down below. Thank you for watching, and as per usual, I hope you have a good day or a good night, whichever it is for you. That said, I will see you all next time. Peace out.